This Instagram video was sent to me by a friend to show me the pro-Palestinian protesters allegedly intimidating innocent Jews outside a nursing home in Canada.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are very proud of the comrades, the brothers and sisters that stood up on both sides of this building to not allow anyone to enter.
Hello everyone, my name is Apostate Aladdin. I wear a mask for my anonymity and safety, and I make videos talking about Islam and other related topics. Today's topic, though I wish it had nothing to do with Islam, unfortunately it does. The caption of the video reads, "This is outside a Jewish senior's home in Ottawa, not a consulate or an embassy, not a government building, not a politician's office, a Jewish senior's home." And the caption remarks about the cowardice of people who allow this to happen and attributes this protest to blind hatred. I'm going to show you the whole video with translation and some background information, and I'll tell you what I think. We'll approach this incident from multiple angles, and then you can come to your own conclusions. So let's watch it together.
First of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salamu ala nabiyyina al-mujahid al-shahid, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi, wa man jahada jihadahu ila yawm ad-din. Ajra. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon you all. We are very proud of the presence that we saw here today. We are very proud of the comrades, the brothers and sisters that stood up on both sides of this building to not allow anyone to enter to sign up to the IDF. And I know that you have all heard and you all know that this is illegal here in Canada. That any recruitment or encouragement for anyone to join a foreign army is illegal.
This protester begins with an Islamic preamble that resembles how sheikhs begin their Friday sermons. In it, he glorifies Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, as a mujahid and a shaheed, a martyr, which is so incredibly tone-deaf and hypocritical, but I'll get to that later. He says that they're not letting anyone in the building because there's IDF recruitment going on inside, which he says is illegal in Canada. Now, is there any truth to this? Is there an organization recruiting Canadians to the Israeli Defense Forces? And if that is happening, is it illegal or immoral? And if it is illegal, is that enough justification to take vigilante action to prevent the crime? Another video from the same protest shows one of them on a loudspeaker telling the rest to allow people to leave, since the goal is just stopping those wanting to enter.
Line to go back in. So please, this is this is a nursing home nurse that's trying to leave. So please, guys, make room. Guys, please make room. She left. Okay, perfect.
Shame on you!
Everyone.
Shame on you!
Everyone, make space. Let them leave. Our job here is not to allow anyone else to go inside and enroll. If the OPS wants to work with terrorists and allow terrorist activities...
I only have 2-minute long videos, so I don't know how long the protesters kept people trapped inside before clarifying these instructions. But no matter how peaceful and non-violent the protest was, if a bunch of Muslims were chanting in Arabic and not allowing people to leave, of course Jews inside would feel anxious and threatened. And when it comes to this masked look, the protesters usually say that they hide their identity because they fear retaliation in their careers, which I'm sure has happened given how divisive the topic is. But if you're Jewish and you're inside a building surrounded by people that look like this and chant Islamic rhetoric, I'm sure that it's an unsettling experience to say the least. All that being said, I was skeptical of the framing of the video caption, making it seem like the protesters were out there to harass seniors at a place that has nothing to do with politics or war, at a mere senior's home. If the protesters were mistaken about the building, what gave them that false impression? So I did some digging and I found this tweet showing a very important hint. A screenshot advertising an event at a Jewish community center in Ottawa, Canada. The post says, "Please join us for a presentation and discussion about SAR-L, Volunteers for Israel. Learn about how you can contribute to Israel by working on an IDF base, carrying out important supportive tasks. This presentation and discussion will be hosted by a recent SAR-L volunteer in the boardroom at the Jewish Community Center." I censored the name just to be safe. The date and location of the event seem to align with the protest, and it is dark outside in the video, which makes sense because sunset in Ottawa is around 6:40 at the time, and the event begins at 7, so I'm pretty sure the video and the event line up. I found a Jewish seniors home in the same block as the community center, and I don't know if these buildings are physically connected or if they were both blocked by the protesters, but it is clear to me that this is not, as the caption suggests, a pointless protest in front of an inconspicuous seniors home. That seems like a partial narrative or a false narrative that serves to deflect and discredit any criticism against Israel and its organizations in Canada. Zionists have been strategically crying anti-Semitism, similar to how Islamists cry Islamophobia. Both have the effect of silencing criticism while devaluing legitimate complaints of bigotry and hate. That being said, I can imagine that there are legitimate and understandable fears that a pro-Palestine protest could result in anti-Semitism, given Islam's historically oppressive attitude towards Jews and the rampant, unapologetic anti-Semitism in Muslim communities, which is one reason why I think Muslims shoehorning Islam into the Palestinian cause is a terrible idea. Palestinians are worth fighting for because they're human, regardless of whether they're Muslim, Christian, or not religious, and to say that they are suffering massively is an understatement. Advocating for them should have nothing to do with religious fantasies and holy feuds. So going back to the screenshot, how do I know that it wasn't faked to justify the protest? It seems legitimate to me because everything in it is not out of the ordinary for this organization. If you go to SAR El Canada's website, you'll find this on the homepage. Join the adventure as a volunteer in Israel. Help Israel. Escape the everyday. Work with the IDF soldiers. Make new friends from around the world. Click here to apply. Can we just pause for a second and note the laid-back tone? If you needed a reminder of how massively overpowered the IDF is, they're inviting Jews to go on what sounds like a field trip where they can escape their monotonous day-to-day and have an adventure with some friends. Tired of your boring office job and the emails and the pointless meetings? How about a vacation in a f***ing war zone? I can only conclude that it's relatively safe to fight on the IDF's side, given the massive amounts of resources they're afforded and their promises to help you with your networking if you volunteer. On the other hand, humanitarian aid volunteers in Gaza and now in Lebanon forget making friends. They're permanently scarred by the war that they witness, and many of them don't know if they're coming back alive at all. That is a stark and bleak contrast to the pitch for IDF volunteers. So based on this organization's own sources, it's clear that they are recruiting Jews, Israeli or not, to go do something to support the IDF, to go work side by side with the soldiers. Sure, they're not necessarily enlisting them as soldiers in combat roles, but they are involving them in an overseas war. If you're Jewish and you live outside of Israel, you might want to reflect on how the IDF doesn't really need your help all that much, at least not when compared to the Palestinian victims, who are stuck between a brutal military force and a fundamentalist terrorist organization. Now, is this sort of volunteer recruitment illegal in Canada as determined by the Foreign Enlistment Act, the FEA? I invite you to pause and read the wording of the act for yourself. The act prohibits Canadians from enlisting in the armed forces of any foreign state at war with a friendly foreign state and prohibits anyone in Canada from inducing another person to enlist with such armed forces. So does this count as enlisting? Does Canada consider the Palestinian state to be a friendly foreign state? Or is the war with Hamas specifically, which is not a friendly foreign state? I don't know the answers to these questions, but despite many people arguing that it might be illegal, it was never ruled illegal. According to an article by the Canadian Jewish News, the case began in 2020 when several progressive groups lodged a complaint against the Israeli consulate in Toronto. The complaint focused on online ads from Israel's consulate in Toronto, which said an IDF representative was available for personal appointments for those wishing to join the forces, not just those required to do their compulsory military service. The RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, investigated and concluded that it is not illegal. The complaint also alleged that the Israeli consulate used IDF veterans to influence young Jews to enlist. Israel's consul general at the time denied the allegations. He argued that Israelis have to do their military duty or settle it through a consulate, which is confusing to me because it doesn't sound like a denial, but more like a reframing, that there's nothing wrong with it because they're Israeli and they have to join the IDF. Okay, I don't know how being a dual citizen applies to this law, but what about those who aren't Israeli? He didn't seem to address that part. After more efforts to get another investigation started, the Justice Ministry said the responsibility for investigating and prosecuting offenses under the FEA rests with independent law enforcement and prosecution services, essentially saying it is not their job to investigate or enforce this law. And since this article is from a Jewish publication, it's not surprising that it says this outcome was a loss to pro-Palestinian activists, and that there is nothing illegal about any of this. It also mentions a similar dismissed allegation against SAR El for recruiting volunteers. Another article by Canadian Dimension, a left-wing publication, gives more details about the efforts to charge SAR-L for the alleged FEA violation. The article says that the federal government and Toronto police failed to investigate the matter. Obviously, both of these publications have their biases. Whether you consider the investigation to be a fair one that found no wrongdoing, or a sign of the reluctance of the Canadian government to create friction with Israel, I'll leave that up to you to decide. The article also highlights how the IDF promotes the group as a way of volunteering for them without becoming an Israeli citizen, while working closely with their soldiers. It lists details about the duration and the nature of the work that the volunteers will perform, which is all information confirmed by the IDF and SAR-L's websites. It even includes servicing firearms and stocking tanks with ammunition, pretty clearly supporting the war effort. Going back to the protest, I can only conclude that it goes deeper than the unexplainable intimidation of Jewish senior people. Whether the person who shared this video knew the truth or not, I can't tell. But the misinformation is the same regardless of their intentions. And this is just one example of why I am very wary of trusting the first thing I read about any incident relating to the Palestine and Israel war, regardless of which side it came from. I had to do some digging and find more primary sources of information, and I encourage you to do the same. And it seems to me like many Jews are often themselves conflating Zionism with Judaism, using Jewish community centers to support Israel or the war or settlements one way or another, while simultaneously claiming that it's anti-Semitic to criticize any of these actions. With all that out of the way, I still have some more thoughts on the protest itself. Religion aside, and I promise I'll get to that in a second, based on the chanting I heard in these videos, I didn't find all of it to be problematic in and of itself. There were chants about resistance from Gaza to Lebanon, and not one martyr should be demeaned. And I can't say that I have a problem with any of that. What is puzzling, though, is why are these chants only in Arabic? I understand that Palestinians speak Arabic, and using their language can give the protesters a sense of camaraderie and support with the victims of the war. However, I presume that more people at the protest speak English than Arabic, and the Jewish people inside the buildings, as well as the rest of the residents of Canada, they primarily speak English. So why make your message inaccessible and murky? Who is the intended audience of these chants? Especially when the protest began with a religious preamble that glorifies Muhammad. How can a non-Arab discern the difference between a prayer and an ominous threat and a peaceful slogan? It feels to me like such an approach mainly serves as a celebration of a minor win against Zionism, or perhaps it makes protesters feel a fuzzy sense of solidarity with each other and with the Palestinians. But how effective is it really at delivering a clear message? Speaking of delivering a message, let's talk about Muhammad, the messenger of Islam. The man and religion being shoved into the Palestinian cause by Muslims who are used to seeing the world through a religious lens. Muhammad is a terrible example to follow or cite, especially in this context. Under Islamic law, during the time of Muhammad and for many eras since his death, Muslim armies would invade, conquer, and subjugate a population. If the civilians were spared from death or enslavement, they'd be given options like converting to Islam or paying a jizya. And the jizya is an extortionist fee that apologists will interpret as a protection fee while under Islamic ruling. Even though the Quranic verse talking about this emphasizes the humiliation this fee is supposed to impose on the non-Muslims, apologists will try to downplay that part. Some would call that a second-tier citizenship and religious apartheid, at best. Does that sound at all familiar? Isn't that something that Israel is criticized for? And Muhammad himself took part in a battle where the Jewish people of Banu Qurayza were massacred in the hundreds after surrendering. The Muslims killed every male over the age of puberty, which disgustingly required them to check for pubic hair to determine if a male child is to be executed. Of course, Islamic apologists have ways of spinning and justifying this, talking about how the Jews betrayed the Muslims first and so on. But if they started it is enough justification, how can this Muslim honestly object to a brutal retaliation to Hamas' attack on Israel? Not to mention that Islam and Muhammad legitimized and furthered slavery and sex trafficking. So if you think that Israel is too brutal for killing civilians, how does that compare to Muhammad doing the same thing and taking children and women and men as slaves afterwards? By the way, none of this is propaganda or fringe scripture taken out of context to make Islam look bad. Look it up yourself. All you'll find from Islamic sources is affirmation of the legality of such acts and justifications and excuses for them. And that's not to say that this guy or all Muslims in the crowd want to see the same things done to Jews or Israelis. When I was a Muslim, I wasn't really aware of all this stuff, and certainly not of the inhumanity and brutality of Islamic rule. I was sold on a feel-good version of Islam, where the Prophet was always fair and right. But given the reality of Islam historically, how is the world at large supposed to assume the best about your intentions and your goals when you start your protest with a speech glorifying a warlord? Muhammad and his followers did horrible things to Jews and other non-Muslims. It is utterly hypocritical to justify and excuse it just because it was done in the name of your holy book and your religion. And it's hypocritical to use him as a symbol of resistance when he was, to millions historically, a symbol of oppression. Keep in mind that none of this criticism of Islam or the pro-Palestinian Muslims is justification to dismiss pro-Palestinian protests entirely or to preemptively wipe out Palestine. Two things can be simultaneously true. Israel's efforts to recruit Canadian Jews to help the IDF are shady at best and illegal at worst. And Islam is an oppressive religion that should have no place in advocacy for human rights, and it undermines the cause they're advocating for. Many pro-Palestinian activists are not happy with Muslims selfishly and blindly making this all about them and their religion. But unfortunately, many activists are Muslims who are accustomed to interpreting the world through a religious narrative. So maybe I'm asking for the impossible here, but for the love of humanity, keep your religion out of it. If you insist on making it Islamic, not only do you come off as ignorant and or hypocritical, but you lose a lot of support from reasonable people who want nothing to do with religion, especially yours. So if you want to die on that hill, glorify Muhammad all you want in these protests, but you're not actually helping Palestinians that way. You're just selfishly indulging in your own religious narrative. Many Muslims and many Jews see this war as perfectly fitting within their cultural and religious narratives. A Muslim can interpret this as a sign of the end of times, or as proof that the Jews cannot be trusted, or that Islam is oppressed everywhere. And a Jew can interpret this as proof that the world is out to get them and they need a promised homeland to defend and dominate by any means necessary. And as an outsider, I wish both sides would wisen up to the reality we live in. For all we know, there is no God, at least not one that spoke to us thousands of years ago through archaic religions. Real people are suffering and dying, and they will probably never be reincarnated for redemption. So please, stop perpetuating religious narratives. It's a vicious and never-ending cycle that sees all sides clinging on to self-fulfilling prophecies that can never be falsified. And as the war continues to escalate with Iran launching rockets at Israel, I don't know what the end will look like. I just know that in the meantime, the needless suffering and death continue. You might be confused by now. Am I saying that the protesters are the good guys or the bad guys? And what about the Jews and or Zionists falsely claiming that this was all about a nursing home? Well, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to bring some nuance into the discussion and to remind you to actually think. You don't even have to like me or my politics to hear me out. Just take a moment to vet the news that you come across and try to approach it from multiple angles. Given the grim nature of the topic, I don't feel good asking you to comment and like and subscribe and all that, but that's just how the algorithms work. If you don't do that, the video won't be viewed by many people, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you to my supporters and donors on Patreon, YouTube, and PayPal. I could not do this without you. And as always, and I don't just mean this when it comes to religion, I'd like to remind you to think critically and think for yourself. And consider watching one of these videos next.